of context. Oh, okay. Now we're recording. To give us a little bit of context, I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague Moira Burse, who's going to talk a little bit more about why we're doing this today.
Thanks so much, Pendle. And hey, everybody. It's great to have so many folks who are interested in leveraging their power as clients of some of these big asset managers that have so much impact on the Amazon and the climate writ large. So like Pendle said, we wanted to start with a little bit of context. Why is the Amazon important? Why is it important to center Indigenous peoples in our work to protect the Amazon and to uphold Indigenous rights? And what's wrong with investing in oil companies and companies engaged in deforestation? So part of it is about the importance of the Amazon. The Amazon is a major climate regulator, right? It's larger than the continental US. It holds around 10% of the Earth's biodiversity. It helps regulate the global climate, and it absorbs about 5% of annual global CO2 emissions currently. And Indigenous peoples are the best stewards of this biodiversity. And they're the best forest protectors, time and time again. They've proven that. And so Indigenous rights go hand in hand with environmental justice. The reason that fossil fuels is so important is both because of the impact that it has on Indigenous peoples and the Amazon rainforest, particularly the Western Amazon, but also because report after report, scientific finding after scientific finding, and even now industry findings are showing that we have to stop expanding fossil fuels if we're going to have any hope of surviving climate chaos, right? The most recent being the International Energy Agency, which is basically an industry group, just came out with a report a few weeks ago showing that no more fossil fuel expansion can happen in order for the world to hit the climate goals set in the Paris Climate Accords. So what do the big three asset managers have to do with the Amazon, and what do client investors have to do with any of this? So as some of you might know, or are learning right now, asset managers invest their clients' money, so your money, right? That means they answer to you, right? You're their bosses. And if enough clients of these firms demand that Indigenous and environmental rights and climate action be respected and honored, they will have to change their investment behavior. And that's why they need to hear from all of you directly. So on this call, we're going to give you the background info on what we've dug up on these firms, and then we're going to get you ready to go on how you can push them to end their ties to Amazon destruction. So with that, I'll pass it back to Pendle.
Thanks for that, Moira. So I'm going to tell you all a little bit about the different reports that we've published and some of our key findings. Really quick, just want to give an overview of what each report is, right? So the first one we see here is Complicity in Destruction 2. This is something that a report that we published with the Association of Brazil's Indigenous Peoples, also known as a PB that we mentioned earlier, in 2019. And it shows links between major financial firms and the agribusiness commodities linked to deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon, like beef or soy. And then we published Complicity in Destruction 3, also with a PB in 2020. And that report was really examining 11 companies that are operating in the Brazilian Amazon that have links to conflicts on indigenous lands, to illegal deforestation, to land grabbing, the weakening of environmental protections, and the production and export of conflict commodities. And then we looked, we just came out with a new report last month called Investing in Amazon Crude 2, which examines the links specifically between these three big asset managers, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, and oil companies that are violating Indigenous rights and harming the environment, mostly in the Western Amazon. So we've just put the links in the chat in case folks want to check these out on their own time to each of these reports. But I just wanted to pick out a couple key examples, case studies that we highlighted in these reports that really show the damage that these the firms that these asset managers are investing in are doing to communities on the ground. So when we take a look at oil, for example, the big three, BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, if we look at all of the research that we've done at Amazon Watch, hold 46 billion in oil companies that are currently operating in the Amazon. And this is according to our most recent report. Again, this was published last month. One example of this is that the big three hold more than 80 million of debt in CNPC, which is a China National Petroleum Company, which in turn has a 45% stake in Plus Petrol Norte, which is an oil company that's currently operating in the Peruvian Amazon. And in Peru, Plus Petrol Norte has allegedly dumped so much crude oil and toxic water runoff into the land that the amount of heavy metals in the blood of local residents actually exceeds global standards. And it's possibly resulting in the statistically high levels of miscarriages and other health problems in the area. This is a company that is also avoiding paying taxes to the Peruvian government by registering in the Netherlands. So not paying taxes to the local government, and also creating huge environmental and health problems for local communities. This is again a company that's being directly supported by these big three asset managers. And we can go into the stats of exactly how much each asset manager holds in each in CNPC, but for time I'll skip through that. And I also want to give an example of land grabbing and deforestation, and the way that these three firms are connected to these occurrences in the Amazon. In total, according to our reports, again, the big three have provided over $11.6 billion to companies tied to conflicts on indigenous lands, including companies tied to illegal deforestation, land grabbing, again, the weakening of environmental protections, the production and export of conflict commodities. So one example of this that I think is relevant to highlight here is that the big three hold 4.4 billion in Anglo American, which is a mining company that has attempted to operate on indigenous territories in the Brazilian Amazon, despite widespread opposition from indigenous communities there. And Anglo American has been really reliant on and really depending on the Bolsonaro regime in Brazil to roll back environmental restrictions and to pull back governmental restrictions around mining on indigenous territories in order to be able to do this. And so I think it's important to share something that an indigenous leader and activist, Alessandra Munduruku, who represents the Munduruku peoples and has been fighting against Anglo American and other mining companies entering their territories previously, but this just really highlights for people the way that these companies are impacting people on the ground. So I'm just going to read this quote that we included in our report because I thought it was particularly impactful. Thanks, Moira, for dropping it in the chat there. Alessandra Munduruku writes, "Mining is causing a great deal of severe impacts. It pollutes our drinking water, contaminates our fish, and leaves only destruction. And the guilty parties are the countries that are buying the iron, gold, and soy. Today, we have a government that is encouraging the invasion of our territories. And the first world countries with interests in exploiting the Amazon have the blood of indigenous people on their hands. These big companies come to our towns and say nice things, like they're going to bring water and schools to us, but it is a lie, because as soon as they arrive, they start to trample on the rights of traditional peoples, both indigenous and riverine." So with that context, I want to remind folks that according to our research, in combined equity and debt in Anglo American, BlackRock holds almost $3 billion, Vanguard holds 994 million, and State Street holds almost 424 million. And this is in a company that is really infringing on indigenous territories and rights to clean air and water. And I think this is a special case to highlight specifically because we actually have some good news related to this, which is that just today, a PB, the Association of Brazil's Indigenous Peoples, is announcing that they've had some success actually in campaigning against Anglo-American, and Anglo-American just revoked its request for licenses to carry out mining, exploitation, and exploration on Munduruku territories in the Brazilian Amazon. And this is a huge victory for the Munduruku peoples and for indigenous peoples in Brazil and all over the Amazon. But it's no thanks to the big three, obviously, right? These companies are continuing to invest in, these asset managers are continuing to invest in companies like Anglo-American all over the Amazon. So now we're going to hear a few words directly from indigenous leaders, Sonia Guajajara and Eloy Terena. And Sonia is the executive coordinator of the Association of Brazil's Indigenous Peoples, a PB, and Eloy is the legal coordinator for a PB. So they weren't able to join us live today, so we're actually going to be sharing some remarks that they've made on a previous webinar that we hosted together. To begin, Sonia is going to speak a little bit about why she and other leaders representing Brazil's indigenous movement first began to try to dialogue with these financial firms investing in private companies that are hurting their territories. Cynthia is just getting the text set up for this, but we're going to play a quick clip from Sonia. And then once we hear from Sonia, we're also going to hear a little bit from Eloy as well. So Cynthia, I'll let you take it away.
Uma carta com a BlackRock.
Yeah, here we go.
Ainda 2019, a gente realizou uma jornada pela Europa com a campanha Sangue Indígena Nenhuma Gota Mais. E essa jornada teve como um dos objetivos também conversar com essas empresas. E por que a gente queria conversar com as empresas, né? Porque aqui no Brasil aumenta a cada dia sobre os territórios indígenas. E com o governo Bolsonaro, né, há uma decisão política de não demarcar os territórios indígenas. Promessa que foi feita ainda na sua campanha e que se concretizou logo no primeiro dia do seu mandato, quando ele já começou ali a desmontar toda a política indigenista e também enfraquecer os órgãos, né, da política indigenista, da política ambiental e de direitos humanos. E com isso, começou também a apresentar e articular com seus aliados no Congresso Nacional para aprovar medidas que suprimem direitos dos povos indígenas, que flexibilizam a legislação ambiental, né, e que também violam direitos humanos. E nós encontramos nessas empresas, né, uma cumplicidade com essa destruição de direitos. Em 2019, né, a PIB, em parceria com a Amazon Watch, trouxe um relatório que apontou aí as grandes empresas que estavam, né, coniventes com essa destruição no Brasil. Em 2020, nós realizamos mais uma vez, né, esse relatório, apresentando ali, né, as empresas cúmplices nessa destruição. E aí a gente encontra a BlackRock como uma das maiores investidoras nas empresas que estão promovendo a destruição aqui no Brasil, seja na área ambiental, né, com o desmatamento, seja com essa violação dos direitos humanos, seja com a emissão de carbono, né? E tudo isso está muito pactuado com a política do governo Bolsonaro.
Okay, so we see that in light of a hostile domestic government, indigenous activists are turning to the private sector to demand that their rights be respected. And so Eloy Terena elaborates a little bit more on this in the next clip, and that one starts at 26:56.
De agradecer pelo convite, especialmente a Amazon Watch, né, que tem acompanhado a PIB nessas articulações. Nós, enquanto movimento indígena brasileiro, temos feito uma incidência junto ao Estado brasileiro, mobilizando também a sociedade civil, e temos o entendimento de que é preciso também que as empresas, né, privadas, as corporações, assumam as suas responsabilidades. Então, é a partir dessa consciência que as lideranças indígenas têm que nós temos demandado, junto a essas corporações, e no caso a BlackRock, para que ela respeite os direitos dos povos indígenas e respeite também o meio ambiente. A PIB já teve a oportunidade, né, de conversar com a BlackRock numa das assembleias de acionistas em 2019, em Nova York, e desde então nós temos enviado cartas, né, solicitando justamente isso, o respeito ao direito dos povos indígenas. Muitas pessoas, quando veem os povos indígenas fazendo esse tipo de incidência, pensam que nós somos contrário, né, ao desenvolvimento. Isso não é verdade. O que nós defendemos é um desenvolvimento que possa ser feito respeitando a vida, respeitando a cosmovisão dos povos indígenas, respeitando os nossos territórios. Para nós não tem razão de ser um desenvolvimento que traga morte, que traga doenças, que traga vários tipos de violações. Esse depoimento que a Sônia Guajajara trouxe é fundamental para a gente entender como que o papel das empresas é fundamental para a gente fazer também com que o Estado adote uma postura de respeito, né, em relação aos povos indígenas. E aí, então, é preciso a gente enxergar a responsabilidade do Estado, é preciso a gente enxergar a responsabilidade das corporações e é preciso também a gente conclamar toda a sociedade civil para que se junte aos povos indígenas que estão fazendo esse enfrentamento todos os dias em suas bases. Então, basicamente, nós pedimos nessa carta.
So now we're going to go back to our slide deck from earlier and give you all a breakdown of just exactly how much each of these firms is contributing to the kind of destruction that Eloy and Sonia were just referencing. And this is taken from a series of different reports that Amazon Watch has researched over the past few years. And you can see the figures on the screen here, but BlackRock is far and away the largest investor in Amazon destruction, with 30 billion in debt and equity in oil companies that are currently operating in the Amazon, 8.2 billion in companies that are involved in land grabbing and indigenous rights violations, and over 2 billion in agribusiness companies tied to deforestation commodities like beef and soy. And then we have Vanguard, which has 12.3 billion in debt and equity in oil companies currently operating in the Amazon, 2.7 billion in companies in land grabbing, and over 2 billion in agribusiness companies. And then State Street is the final culprit here, with over 3.1 billion in debt and equity in oil companies, 708 million in land grabbing, and almost 2 billion in agribusiness companies like beef and soy. So now that we've kind of seen these, we want to talk a little bit about kind of the role of clients and investors in all of this, and the kind of action that we can take together. So we've heard about the impacts that the big three are having on Indigenous communities and on the rainforest, and it's important for us to use our role to make these firms do better, right? So if we can't make them do better, we can take our money out of, take our money elsewhere, excuse me. But right now we want to use our position as clients to hold these firms accountable, right? So clients are best positioned to engage these firms because ultimately it's your money that they are investing. So if you're invested in BlackRock, Vanguard, or State Street, and we see that there's a lot of questions in the chat right now, we promise we're going to try to get to all of them as best we can. Or if you are invested in funds managed by these firms through an intermediary, through a broker, you can demand that they put your money into funds that are fossil fuel free and deforestation free. And it's important to send a message that if no such funds exist, you can demand that these firms create them, right? This is about showing consumer demand for products that are fossil fuel and deforestation free. So we're going to be watching closely to see how these firms and how our investment advisors react to our message today. And if they don't take action, we would encourage you all to, and we can think about this together, think about moving your money to another place at that point, but we're not quite at that point yet, right? So now I'm going to pass the mic over to my colleague Cynthia again, who's going to prep everybody in our action. And once we get prepped for that, then we can go through, we'll show you the template language that we've drafted, and then we'll take some questions as people are getting ready to send the action. So Cynthia, I will pass the mic over to you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Pendle, for that. So I'm going to be dropping this link into the chat, and we will be doing this together, doing this action together. If I can find, there we go. Here is the action toolkit. If you all can go here with me. We have our email opened so that we can show you. We can show you. We'll be opening the action toolkit. Here it is. And in this action toolkit, we have our 3 template letters. If you are a client of BlackRock, Vanguard, or State Street, you can click on either one and it'll take you directly to the letter that we'll be using. And so we have very specific instructions. If you could help us out with making sure that when we are creating this email, that we also make sure to, so we have exactly who we're going to be sending it to right here, who they are, their names, their positions. And so once we have all of the emails set up, to please make sure that we're BCCing our finance team email. And the reason that's important is because with that, we'll be able to keep track of the emails that you're sending, the responses that you're getting. And that way we can support you with making sure that we're, if you have any questions based on the responses that you get, that we're there included in the email to be able to respond, to help you respond. So again, here are all the emails, depending on the asset firm that you're emailing. Here are the emails to send it to. If you could BCC our finance team email. And then for the subject line, we wanted everyone to choose their own subject line. We'll give you some examples right now, but just to explain a bit, the reason why we want that is to make sure that on the receiving end, they're not able to just, click all of the subject lines that look the same and do a mass delete. So if you wanted to add a subject line, whatever you choose, something similar to my investments or BlackRock investments or anything that you, any message that you want to leave in that subject line. And then also we have the message right here. You can just
thanks for that kind of rundown, Cynthia, and showing people exactly how to open it up. Folks should be able to highlight things in the document and copy and paste. Let us know if for whatever reason you're not able to do that, but it should be possible. So I'm gonna basically take everybody through a rundown of go through the letter and what we've written in the letter, so that we're all clear on what we're asking and what we're communicating with our investment advisors. So sorry, one second. Right. So when we're looking at the letter, we start off much like we did today, explaining the importance of the Amazon and the indigenous peoples who steward it, the role that indigenous peoples play in protecting the Amazon. And then we mention the recent IEA announcement that Moira talked about earlier, calling for an end to fossil fuel expansion by this year. And we call out each firm for taking credit for recent net zero commitments, while also hypocritically investing in harmful fossil fuel and deforestation industries. So we break down the research that Amazon Watch and a PB have done that shows the dollar amounts that each firm has contributed to these industries. And then we're calling on these firms to stop putting client money into fossil fuels, and to engage with companies that are causing deforestation, so that they adopt clear policies that ensure the protection of indigenous rights and of the rainforest. And we close out the letter with a series of questions that are really meant to hold each firm accountable, and really meant to ask them to think critically about the impacts that they're having in the Amazon. So you can copy and paste the text from the letter, and feel free to add or change any of it with your own words. In fact, we'd really encourage you to do that. Maybe talk a little bit about why this matters to you. You know, I know some folks on the call today had reached out to our team previously to share letters that they drafted on their own. And people talk about maybe their grandchildren or their children and wanting to leave a clean and safe and healthy planet behind for them. So I think adding a personal touch to this message can really go a long way. And we purposely did not suggest any subject lines, as Cynthia mentioned, because we don't want all of these messages to wind up in somebody's spam filter. And so the more individualized they are and the more personalized they are, the better chance they have of actually impacting the folks that we're trying to get to listen. Yeah, if you all have any questions, let us know. While everybody is copying and pasting the template language into their own emails, and again, reminder, please BCC finance team at amazonwatch.org, so that we can keep track of everybody that is working on this campaign with us. We're happy to open up a discussion right now. So does anybody have any questions for our team? I think Roberta and Cynthia and others have been monitoring the chat. Also just want to let folks know, it looks like we still have plenty of time left, but we're happy to stay on an extra 10 minutes longer if folks are having tech issues or if the conversation runs longer than expected. Roberta, do you want to kick us off with the first question?
Yeah, absolutely. So there were a couple of questions on the same topic of index investing. So I'm gonna ask those questions first, and then I'll move on to other topics. So the first one was the first question was the following: I inquired of a board whether they were not concerned with having big chunks of their portfolio with BlackRock, given its growing bad rep regarding actions in the Amazon. And the response was that the institution in question had a passive index fund with BlackRock, and as such, they're just administrator managing a predetermined passive investment. What kind of questions should we ask them when we hear this type of argument? Is there anything that you can tell me that will help me address BlackRock's index investing problem? And how is the institution through these investments in index investing still harming the Amazon and its people? And then the second question was very, very, very similar, but about Vanguard. So Vanguard's mutual funds are invested in index funds, where Vanguard does not control the index, they just track it. So is it Amazon Watch position that Vanguard should, for example, stop offering all the funds that track the S&P 500? And if you want that to happen, yes, that is it. So those are the big two on index investing.
Sure, I can respond to those, and those are good questions that come up a lot, in part because what we found is that asset managers like to hide behind this idea of passive investing to excuse inaction on climate and indigenous rights abuses. And I use air quotes there because as academics have said, there's a pretty famous academic paper, if you want to get really into the weeds, literally titled Passive in Name Only. And the idea is that there actually are a lot of decisions that asset managers like BlackRock and Vanguard make when they are creating index funds. In some cases, they actually create the indices that track that the funds track. And also what is in the index of the S&P 500 as the example that was used, an index fund is tracking the performance of that index. It's not actually mirroring 100% one for one the companies that are in the S&P 500 index, right? So those are a couple of examples of how index funds work that demonstrate how asset managers, particularly the big ones like BlackRock and Vanguard that are the biggest in the world and can actually determine who the S&P or who MSCI or who some of these index makers actually, what kinds of indices they make, and then as asset managers, how closely they're tracking the index, what the tracking error is, and things like that. So there's actually a fair bit of power that they have. And I'll share this article that actually one of Roberto's colleagues recently wrote that helps explain some of these dynamics and links to some of those academic papers and others if folks really want to dig into the weeds. And then I think the second part of the answer to that question is that we think that that BlackRock and Vanguard and others should be making their main funds, the flagship funds, the ones that they advertise to all the clients that come through their doors, be climate safe, right? And also they should be offering funds that are really tailored toward the things that their clients want, like you. So, if you're, that's what Pando was referring to earlier when she said that we want to be asking them as clients, what funds are you offering that are truly fossil fuel free and truly deforestation free? Can you name them for me so I can consider moving my money to them? If you don't have those, why not, right? So those are some of the questions in that template letter that we're suggesting you send as a first step, right? Because in part, as a client, you want to collect information, you want to be really understanding where your money's going. And then we're going to be following up with all of you later to see what kinds of responses you've got, if any. And that's where we can then talk about what comes next. Does it mean talking to your investment advisor about moving your money or other steps like that? I hope that helped.
Pando, should I move on to other topics?
Yeah, I think that was a pretty thorough answer. Thanks.
Cool. Okay, so the next set of questions, it's about retirement plans. So some folks have 401(b)(3)s with Vanguard, and they're asking whether it's possible to switch to other companies and if it's possible to transfer these retirement plans without penalties.
Sure. Well, I would say talk to whoever at your company manages your company's 403(b) program. So at Amazon Watch, we're fortunate to have a 403(b), and one of our colleagues is the one who interfaces with that program and helps us set those up and whatnot. So I would actually did this about a year ago. I went to our colleague Joseph and I said, "Hey, Joseph, the options that we have for our 403(b) aren't providing the opportunity for me to truly invest my values, right? And as an organization that is campaigning on this, we really, let's do this. And so he said, you're right. And we found a new broker that helped us get access to funds that do provide fossil-free and deforestation-free investing options. So I would say as a first step, talk to the person at your company who handles that. And honestly, you could ask them, essentially you could send them a version of this letter or have the conversation using the letter as a template. And ask them those questions that we have at the bottom of the letter, like what funds are available? If they're not available like I want, why not?
Yeah, and I would also add another question that we frequently get is, how do people know what they're investing in exactly, or what the funds that they're investing, if the funds that they're investing in right now are clean, so to speak. And so we actually have some resources that we've put in the action toolkit that folks can use to look up individual funds that y'all might be investing in. And basically you go to these sites, this is fossilfreefunds.org and deforestationfreefunds.org. And these are really incredible tools that some of our allies have made that allow you to take the ticker number of a given fund and then go and check out what its record is on human rights, on deforestation, on fossil fuels. And of course, that's a very painstaking process, but it's definitely worth the time and something to definitely alert your asset advisor, your investment manager or advisor about. Do we have any other questions?
Yes, we have 3 questions left. So switching gears a little bit, this question is about something you mentioned in your presentation, Pendle. What are conflict commodities?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we say conflict commodities, we're referring to commodities that often are tied to violence or land grabbing or environmental destruction. And some examples are the beef and soy industries that I mentioned, right? A lot of these companies are actually sourcing from lands that have been deforested illegally, or that are encouraging the grabbing of taking indigenous territories. So I gave that example of Anglo-American, right, a mining company that is trying to mine on territories rightfully controlled by the Munduruku peoples. And Alessandra Munduruku spoke a little bit about some of the ways that the land there has been impacted by these commodities, right? Gold, copper, other commodities that are mined on indigenous territories. They pollute the local environments, and they cause a lot of conflicts between local peoples and people who are trying to come in and do the mining. But another example of kind of the typical cycle of destruction that we see in a lot of commodities that maybe a lot of folks aren't aware of is generally what happens is you'll have loggers come in, illegal loggers come in and cut down prime rainforest. And then because the wood is valuable, and then typically that area will be burned by people who are hoping to clear the land for agribusiness like cattle grazing or soy cultivation. And so it's actually really important to mention this. I think it's really relevant right now as the fire season is starting in Brazil, that the annual fires that we see in Brazil are set. It's not a natural occurrence. These are fires that are set by people who are purposely trying to clear land in order to make space for commodities like soy, like cattle, to be grown in those parts of the rainforest. So when we say conflict commodities, we're referring to monocultivations of soy or of African palm that are taking place on parts of the rainforest that were purposely raised in order to make way for those crops. Or we're talking about cattle that's being grazed on land that was illegally deforested. And one example of this is JBS, which is the world's largest, excuse me, there's a giant rainstorm happening outside my window, so I hope people aren't too freaked out. But JBS is one of the world's largest beef traders. And a report came out pretty recently showing that they were sourcing a lot of their cattle from lands that were being where people were grazing cattle on lands that had been illegally deforested, and then sort of cycling the cattle into legal lots. So there was all this sort of dirty cattle laundering, I guess you could call it, going on in the chain in the beef supply chain. So that's what we're referring to when we talk about conflict commodities. Yeah, I see a question from somebody asking, is this what RAN is referring to when they say conflict palm oil? And yeah, that's what they're talking about.
Pendle, is there time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, I think so. We still have 7 more minutes left in the hour. So
okay,
see
so
what people have.
I caught 2 more questions. So one is, what is your take on Engine 1? And do you feel like there is a good chance of tangible success and change achievable through this route? And then the other question that I caught is, what about getting state teachers' retirement funds to divest from fossil fuel companies?
Well, and then I also see Carlos has a hand up. Carlos, do you want to say your question real quick, and maybe we can wrap them all in together to finish up. Carlos, if you're trying to talk, you're on mute. Okay, feel free to put your question in the chat if you still have it. So Engine 1, for folks who don't know, is referring to a company that started pretty recently that successfully waged a campaign to get several folks affiliated with it to be elected to the board of directors of ExxonMobil. Roberta, if you wouldn't mind finding the comment that we put together, thank you, and dropping it in the chat. So, I think as a coalition of organizations working on these issues, we have really worked on pressuring shareholders to vote to have board members that are accountable and care about climate change, and certainly to get rid of some of the really egregious. A lot of these companies have really awful people on their boards who have been intimately involved with climate denial and things like that, and they shouldn't be on the board of these companies. I think we don't know enough about who the Engine 1 people are and what their plans are to say yes or no, but it certainly, I think, is a sign that that there's real scrutiny and real pressure on some of these big oil companies to change their ways. So Roberta just dropped into the chat a link to a sort of a statement and reflection that the BlackRock Big Problem campaign put out when those Engine 1 board of directors folks were elected. So please take a look at that. And then, in terms of pension funds, pension funds are a great place to organize if folks are part of big pension funds like like public employee funds, teachers pension funds in big states, particularly like California, New York, and the like. Those are great places to organize. Also, the TSP, the Thrift Savings Plan, which is the federal employees retirement fund. Some of our colleagues and allies are working to organize those folks. So this is all about leveraging our power as customers and as clients and as beneficiaries in order to move money out of the things that are literally causing climate change and rainforest destruction and indigenous rights abuses and into things that are beneficial for the planet and for people. And I'll just say that, I see Pendle, Carlos, feel free to be in touch with us, and of course others as well. Our emails are in the chat, and we look forward to helping any and all of you to organize yourselves as clients or to organize your workplaces and your colleagues as well. And I see somebody messaging me about the thrift savings plan. Please email me directly. I'll put my email again in the chat, and I can connect you to folks who are working on that.
And Moira, there is one more question from Charles about leveraging big companies that have the retirement plans administered by the big three. So yeah, he's asking whether have we considered that strategy.
Yeah, but we haven't necessarily known where to start. So if you think at your company there might be some interest, I think we'd be very interested in talking to you about that. So yeah, so please email us if you think that's something that would be of interest. Obviously, you know, the more numbers, the bigger names, the better, the greater the pressure is. So please do get in touch, Charles or anyone else who thinks their company or their friend's company or their partner's company might be interested. Great.
All
Kendra,
right.
do you want to close us out?
Yeah, well, thank you everybody for your questions. And again, if maybe we can drop the action toolkit link in the chat one more time for folks. Please do send those emails and send them directly to your advisors, and please put us in BCC so we can keep track of everybody and keep track of the responses that folks get, and reach out to us directly when you hear back. And as Moira said, you know, it's going to take a lot of people in order to move these firms. So the more folks we have involved, and yes, if you have companies that you're working for that you think would be interested in partnering with us on this, please get in touch. We want to work together. So we'll be in touch soon in probably the next few weeks with next steps. But in the meantime, please share the responses that you get. If anybody has any more final questions, you know, I'll be lingering a little bit longer and make sure folks have any tech questions figured out. Thank you all for joining us, and we will be in touch soon.
Thanks so much, everyone. Looking forward to working
Thank you,
with you all.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Another question from somebody who is asking, will it fall on us to do the homework and let them know what the non-deforestation free funds are, or the non-fossil fuel funds are, or should we expect them to do this themselves? And or do we need to educate them on how to do this? And I would say the answer is that, you know, we can use the tools that I pointed out in the toolkit that are fossilfreefunds.org and deforestationfreefunds.org. Those are great places to be able to check and see where your funds are invested. But the truth is that these are asset manager companies, so they know how to check what their funds are invested in. And the whole point of this exercise is to really push them to ensure that they are offering funds to clients that are free of deforestation and free of fossil fuel companies. So we are asking them to do it themselves, recognizing that they're failing people. And you can, of course, pass them the resources that we shared with you all, fossil-free funds and deforestation-free funds. But as asset managers and asset management companies, this is their professional responsibility is to know exactly where they're investing clients' funds. So we're pushing them to do better and really monitor how their investments are impacting people and climate. So that's what I would answer to that. And yeah, glad to get that extra question. Again, lingering a little bit longer in case anybody has final questions. That was a direct message question. So if you're shy, feel free to direct message us. We're happy to answer questions. If there are no more questions, though, I think we can probably close out. Yeah, I'm not seeing any other direct messages. Moira, Cynthia, are you guys getting any?
No,
Okay.
I think we can close this out. Thanks so much, everybody.
All right.
And we look forward to working with you. Take care.
Thanks all.